We should all know that it would be impossible to really sound just like Jim Hall, because the only way to actually achieve that would be to be Jim Hall.
It's like saying to Pavarotti, teach me to sing like you.
Maybe it's just me, but I often cringe at these sorts of inflated video titles that we all seem to succumb to here on YouTube. I mean, is this really what we're all becoming here? But whatever. If you do still insist on trying to sound like Jim Hall or think that you could sound like him,
Just remember, it's not a lie if you believe it.
alright, ridiculousness aside, I do want to share a cool example today that comes from Jim Hall, and I'm going to break it down for you and highlight some cool concepts that we could take out of this example. If you're digging the video, it'd really mean a lot to me if you gave it a like, and consider becoming a subscriber as well as a contributor to Patreon as well, where you'll get all the PDFs on this channel for only $5 a month. However, the PDF for this little example here today, I'm going to include for free since Thanksgiving is coming up, and if you want to check it out, all you have to do is click on the link in the description, but I'll also have it up for sale on my website if you're in a giving mood, but I'll leave that up to you. Alright, so I hope you enjoy. Anyway, the example today is coming from the title track off of another great live duo album from Jim Hall and Ron Carter entitled Telephone, and what I basically transcribed is the last minute and a half or so of the recording, which consists of the last two choruses of Jim Hall's solo, followed by the little bridge section, which is also the intro to the tune, and then the head or melody out twice, and then finally the ending at the end of it. Alright, so I'm going to share a little clip of this with you now as I play it straight through, and then we'll talk about it after. So here it is. Okay, so first of all, I'm sure a lot of you guys can tell that the form for most of this, with the exception of the little bridge and ending, is really just a basic blues form in the key of F. And it's really more specifically more of like a classic straight blues with a 5-4-1 type of turnaround, generally speaking, at the end, as opposed to a more jazzy 2-5-1, okay? I'll talk more about the form or those turnarounds in a little bit, and I'm not going to put any diagrams up in today's video. That's why I'm putting the PDF out for free if anyone wants to check it out, alright? So I'm going to start with the second to last chorus of his solo that I started with, and for most of that chorus, up until the last 4 bars of the turnaround, he's really just playing around with this one sort of constant, interesting concept, alright? So he starts, on the 1 chord over an F7, and he's basically dealing with these notes, which we can see as a G augmented triad, which of course is the same thing as B augmented or D sharp augmented, but I'm going to call it G augmented, alright? Now this is a really interesting triad that can relate to like an F7, because if we look at the notes of a G augmented triad over like an F7 tonality, we get the 9 or the 2, the flat 5 or the sharp 11, and then we get the flat 7. So those notes specifically over an F7 sound basically create a more specific like F7, sus9, sharp11 type of tonality, which we might describe as a unique variation on a Lydian dominant type of tonality, alright? And that's a really cool sound to use over the blues, over a tonic chord or the 4 chord. You can kind of stay on it to give that more hip kind of sound, alright? But the thing that makes this interesting to me is if we think about this sort of parent tonality as F Lydian dominant, well, that mode or scale is related to C melodic minor, and if we thought of the other modes that relate to that, like what's the mode that we would get if we started on G of that same scale? That would be G Mixolydian flat 6, and the thing that's really interesting about that is we do get a G augmented triad from that scale, but it's not really technically the sharp 5, it's really the flat 13. So it's almost like this little bonus triad that comes out of this scale that isn't really actually what the real triad built off of that degree is. Okay, so we can get a cool little device from this where if we have a dominant chord and we want to imply a Lydian dominant type of tonality, all we have to do is think of an augmented triad that is up a whole step from the root of the dominant chord, and that's a cool way to basically get that sound, alright? Now, basically, first 8 bars of blues, especially a basic blues, we're really just dealing with the 1 chord or the 1-7 and the 4 chord. So we already know that we're using this for the 1 chord, and then if we use a little bit of theory and knowledge about blues and tritone substitution and dominant chords, we know that if we want to get the 4 chord, all we have to do is take the original figure and basically move it down a half step, okay? Because that's kind of relating to like the tritone sub of the 4. I'm not going to go too off into the theory on that right now. Alright, so for the B flat 7, when he gets there, he's just taking that figure and moving it down. And also, when he's on the F7, he'll also kind of move it up, which is like a tritone sub of like the 5, alright? So these are pretty common harmonic devices that you can take. If you have some sort of dominant figure on a blues, you can move it, you know, up a half step to kind of imply the 5, or down a half step to imply the 4. And because I really just wanted to highlight the use of this augmented triad here to get this unique kind of dominant sound, I'm not going to talk too specifically about the rhythms that he's playing, and you can check out what I wrote in the PDF. It's all exact in the PDF, but sometimes when you're listening to that part of the recording, it could be a little unclear on what exactly he's playing. Like, is he just hitting those 3 notes? Is he going down there? I think sometimes like he goes more, but it's still all generally the same thing harmonically, and what I have in the PDF rhythmically is accurate and has the right augmented triads falling in the right place, alright? So you still get something that's musically accurate if you check it out. Okay, so that's the first cool thing that we can take from this, is his use of augmented triads over dominant chords. Now, the last 4 bars of this chorus, we have the turnaround, and he basically plays this. Right? So, like I said, basic blues type of form, we have like a 5-4-1 turnaround. So on the 5 chord, right? So what this is, you know, as a basic grip on the guitar, because he's skipping 1 string, it's almost like a C minor 9-13, like a Dorian type of thing, but I'm not playing this note, which would be like the flat 3rd. So all we have, like over a C root note, would be the flat 7, the 13 or 6, and then the 9, okay? So this is pretty cool because there's no 3rd, and it's not suspended either, so because there's no 3rd, we can use this as a dominant chord. It's always good to remember, you know, in terms of creating unique sounds or variations on a more basic tonality, it's not always just about what notes you're playing, but what notes you're leaving out as well. So as long as we don't have the wrong 3rds, it can still work, alright? So that's why this is kind of like a unique sound. I didn't have to think about anything harmonically advanced to get this. I'm just figuring out what he's doing on recording and simply saying, oh, okay, that's his little structure. And then he does his little side slipping thing, moving it up a half step, kind of like the whole tritone sub thing like I was talking about before, just to create some interest. And then he just takes that figure and moves it down a whole step for the 4 chord. Okay, so cool little interesting voicings there that's really based, in my opinion, on a more simple structure. And then from there, we kind of, you know, approach the 1 and he does this thing. Okay, this is a very cliche type of thing. It almost reminds me like of Monk as well, where if we took the top note, we're just chromatically resolving or leading into the root, the F, all right? But we're just kind of harmonizing that with major seconds, all right? Just to kind of create that cool sound, all right? And that's all that is. And then at the end of the chorus, we're kind of leading into the beginning of the next chorus, still with the augmented triad, and then he lands at the top of the next chorus on the root, right? So that's the first chorus. So, going into the last chorus of his solo now, the next line that he plays, this first real like linear line, we can pull another really interesting concept out of, all right? So he goes, right? So why is this cool to me, all right? So first of all, this line is coming in bar 3 of the form, where we basically are still on the 1 chord, right? Because, let's see, it's like coming from the end of the last chorus. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. That's the 1 right there, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, right? So what can we take from this? Well, if we look at this and try to find a pattern or something that we might recognize on the guitar, this to me, it's really like an E-flat Dorian shape, which of course is the same thing as D-flat major, or if we were going to think of it modally as a root note of F, we can think F Phrygian, okay? So even though we have an F7 chord, it's kind of like our tonic chord, this is a cool example of like modal mixture where it can actually sound really cool to use a Phrygian sound over a dominant chord. And not that it needs to be analyzed, but I think the reason why it could work and still sound good is because, you know, instead of a regular sort of F Phrygian, you know, we have that F Phrygian dominant mode that comes from the harmonic minor, and it's really the same thing almost, except with a major third instead of a minor third. And that works over a dominant chord, obviously. So a more normal Phrygian scale is pretty close to that, and it can still be used over a dominant chord. And in measure 4 of the form, in the next bar, he's still resolving and landing on the major third, all right? So by kind of sneaking in this modal mixture where he's using an F Phrygian sound over a dominant chord, it creates a little bit more harmonic interest and motion to keep the ears, you know, interested, I suppose. And if we look at the actual phrasing of his idea as well, seems pretty scalarly to me, all right? And I'm only bringing that up because these days you always find people that seem to hate on scales. You know, they think it's all about triads, and triads are great too. I don't discriminate. I don't think it's a one or the other thing, but you might have some people that are like, oh, you can't make phrases with scales just literally ascending or descending, right? But hey, if it's good enough for Jim Hall, it's good enough for me, all right? So let's continue moving forward. So in bar 4 of this chorus, we have, right? And this, again, he found a little opportunity to kind of utilize these sort of parallel, little bend there, minor 6, all right? Over an F7 chord, we have the major third, the root. Now here, he's kind of bending up from like the sharp 9 or flat third to the third, right? That's another signature sort of thing of Jim Hall's phrasing, these little subtle bends, all right, that kind of add a little flavor. So he was, and then he brings that pattern down again. So this is the 9 or the 2, and then the flat 7, and then the flat 9 bending into the root, or the 9. Okay, and then he lands on this in bar 4, all right, or I'm sorry, bar 5, where now we're on the 4 chord. So in this bar, he goes, right? Now, this is another little interesting phrase. Doesn't need to be overanalyzed. We start on the 5th of a B flat 7 chord, right? Then we go up to the flat 9. And this is an interesting note out of context to play over like a 4-7 chord, because a flat 9 and a dominant chord is usually being used in a more dissonant tension kind of way, where that dominant is meant to sort of lead you somewhere. But that's not what we're really doing here with the 4 chord, all right? The reason why it works, I think, is because of the interval of a tritone. It just kind of has that cool sound. And then continuing the phrase, we have the 4 leading back into the 5th. So it's like, and then flat third to third, and then root flat 7, all right? So it's actually pretty clearly outlining the basic B flat 7 harmony, but he's also sort of sneaking in this flat 9, and then these little passing or leading tones, right? But it works. So, coming from the bar before, right? Now, bars 7 and 8, we're going back to the 1 chord, and starting on the 8th note before, we land over there, just kind of sliding. It's like root of an F7 chord, but then major 3rd, 4th, 5th, then sliding back to the 3rd, 2nd, and then he plays this. Now this, and this is also leading into the next thing, this little shape, which can be used to imply a lot of different harmonies that I like a lot, I'm seeing this as basically A flat 7 shape, alright? And this is really based, as you'll see in a second, like if I added this note on top, this is like an A flat 13, this shape. It's a great shape. It also works up here. You may recognize it more as like the top of like a 13 type of shape, right? But basically just the note in my bass is a whole step down from the root of whatever dominant chord I'm thinking of. So A flat 7, I go down a whole step, right? So, right? Now from there, it's A flat 7 because that's like the tritone sub of a 5 leading to G7, which is where I'm going to next. Same exact shape as before, and I'm also going to add that little G root note on top of it, right? So it's okay, now this is really interesting, right? Like I said, we have a G7 chord here. So this is bar 9 in the blues. This is where we have a turnaround. And the harmony that he's sort of implying here is also pretty interesting. So the first bar here, we have a G7 chord, right? Now that would be a 2-7 in the key of F, which is totally fine. If we were to think of the turnaround more as like a 2-5-1 type of thing, which we could do, well, we could use a 2-7 for the 2 chord there, and that's what he's doing, okay? But then he's going into this, okay? Now these notes, he's kind of implying more than the notes that he's using, because we're only using 2 notes, an A flat and an F, and then there's the other A flat up there, okay? I would see this really as implying the 5th and flat 7 of a B flat 7 chord, okay? So basically, this little turnaround that he's implying is a G7, a 2-7 chord leading into a B flat 7 chord, which is really like a 4-7 in the key. And this is an interesting variation on a turnaround here, because usually if we have a 2 chord first, whether it's a 2 minor or a 2-7, we expect it to go to the 5, like a 2-5-1 resolution. And also, the other sort of variation that I talked about before would be the more classic 5-4-1 turnaround. But here, this is sort of like a fusion between both of those. It's not 2-5-1 and it's not 5-4-1. It's 2-4-1, right? And those two dominants, G7 as well as B flat 7, they're a minor third apart, so they're kind of related to that diminished relationship as well, so it's a totally logical sort of movement to go from like a 2-7 chord to a 4-7 if you wanted to, alright? So that's another real interesting thing. And then we kind of end the form with this little walk up to the tonic dominant, right? Because that's a F7, so, you know, E flat 7, E7, F7, alright? And that would be the end of the solo. Okay, now the next part is the little bridge section, which really just consists of a walk-up of 4 dominant 7 suspended chords, and they play it with these stock shapes, nothing fancy at all. So this is like a C7 suspended, or like a B flat triad over C, and then he walks up to D flat 7 suspended, or B over D flat, and he fills up the space after with a little fill. Okay, just outline that harmony. Then he has D7 suspended, and then finally E flat 7 suspended, and then he has this little double stoppy little lick that sounds great as well. And that'll take us to the melody out. Alright, now, I'm not going to talk too much about the analysis of the melody, but if I were to break down some of it, you know, we're actually landing on a passing tone or a leading tone on the downbeat here, because it's one and, right? The root is F, but we're starting on the leading tone, which is another example of breaking the rules of convention and still sounding good. So what do you have? Now here's the 5th of the F7, 3rd, 6, 4, 5, 4, and then a little classic blues thing with the flat 3rd passing tone, like almost like an enclosure, root, 5th, root, right? So that's the first 4 bars. Then we land on the 4 chord in measure 5, And this is like a variation on that melody, but we accommodate the 4 chord. So now this note would be the 5th of B flat 7, so we're kind of leading into it. 1 and, no, that would be the 3rd, that's a different note there than what the first variation was, of a B flat 7 chord. Then root, flat 3rd, 3rd, root, 5th, and now this next phrase, when we go back to the F7, there's an interesting thing from a technical or phrasing point of view. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. But let's just say we started the phrase on 1, right? And this is really cool because those first 2 notes are like quarter notes. 1, 2, or not quarter notes, but both landing on the downbeats. 1, 2, the first one is a quarter note. But the little thing that makes it unique is he's not sliding into the next note. It's not 1, 2. He's picking the second note, but he's still kind of sliding like out of the first note. 1, 2, which is very subtle, but really has a nice effect on the line. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and right? And that'll take us to the last 4 bars, which is the turnaround. And again, he's kind of implying more with less notes like he did before. Okay, so we're thinking of a C7 chord. All we have is the flat 7, the 5th, and then the flat 7 again. And this is, again, really interesting how he's using 2 basic chord tones, but he's kind of voicing it in the way where he puts the 7 below the 5th, so you create the interval of a 6 instead of a 3rd, and then just hitting the octave, right? You can make so much with less sometimes. Alright, so C7, and then we move it down a whole step for the B flat 7, and then that takes us again back to the ending with this same little walk up to resolve it, alright? So that would be the first time through the melody or head, and then they do it one more time, and then at the very end, after he plays that, the ending, right? And this is really cool. So he starts with this little, it's just an octave of the note C. We don't have to overanalyze this harmonically, but it's basically like the, like the 5th of the key. And then we just kind of walk it up chromatically. I added in this note in between, it's like 4ths and 5ths, so it's very sort of smooth, stable sounding. And I move it down a whole step, and then he plays this, alright? And this is a really cool little voicing. Technically, I think Ron Carter is playing the note in the bass there. So what is he playing? If we're going to think of this as a A flat chord, or that's the root note in the bass, we have the 9, the sharp 11 again, and the root. So this is kind of like the same sort of thing that we had before when we were playing like the augmented triads over the dominant chords, the augmented up a whole step, right? The original key or tonic chord was F7, of course, but now we're kind of ending on this little A flat 7 thing, but A flat is a minor 3rd up from F, so that dominant, I guess, is related to a diminished. Doesn't really matter, but that's what he's doing. And again, very interesting flavor for what is a more specific variation on like an A flat 7 sharp 11 chord, instead of that, or there's a difference between this and that, right? But same basic tonality, and it's just a very cool example of something that you can use in an ending, or just that voicing in general, right? And I didn't have to do anything to discover that kind of voicing as like a sort of device that I needed to learn academically. I'm simply just learning what Jim Hall is doing and taking it and seeing it as something that I can use myself if I like the sound of it, alright? So that's basically it. Anyway, we're just going to leave it there today. If anyone has any questions or anything they want to say, please put it in the comments. I'm here to help. And in the next episode,
hope you're ready for the next episode. Hey,
I may be considering doing another little random video right now. I'm actually going to be away for this week for Thanksgiving, so I won't really have the ability to film all the video content that I want, but maybe I'll do something special and unique for you guys, but you'll just have to wait and see, alright? But if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it. Like I said, if you gave it a like and consider becoming a subscriber as well as a contributor to Patreon. And if you're new to this channel, my name is Derek Plavin, and even though I've been doing a lot of random videos a little bit lately, This is still basically like a free online jazz guitar course that for the most part is still trying to unfold in a logical order. So if you really want to get the most out of this channel, I would recommend going back to the beginning and trying to go in order as best as you can, or at the very least watch the first 3 or 4 episodes to see what I'm all about, and then you could take it from there. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you guys in episode 89.
Swinging and playing the blues. That's what we about.
I try to help you.